The year is 985 AD. A cold wind howls across the North Atlantic. Wooden longships cut through grey waves, their sails striped red and white glow faintly under the setting sun. These are the Vikings of Erik the Red, chasing destiny beyond the known world. Centuries later, the ruins remain. Silent stone churches, abandoned farms, and graves swallowed by ice. No one knows why they vanished. Did famine claim them? Did war or faith divide them? Or did the North Sea itself erase their world? This is the story of the forgotten Viking settlements and the mystery they left behind. The North Sea was not a place, it was a test. For the Vikings, it was the line between the known and the unknown, between home and eternity. In the late 10th century, Scandinavia was a restless frontier of cold ambition. Norway's fjords echoed with the ring of hammers, the thud of axes, and the call of seafaring songs. The Norse world had begun to overflow, its warriors, traders, and farmers seeking new horizons as land and resources grew scarce. To the west lay Iceland, and beyond it, a whisper of a land where the sea met ice and green fields stretched under a pale sun. That whisper would soon become a promise, and a legend. Among those who refused to fade into the northern fog was Erik Thorvaldsson, known to history as Erik the Red. Exiled from Iceland for manslaughter, he sailed west in 982 AD, guided only by the stars and a will unbroken by punishment. What he found was an island larger than any Norseman had imagined, a land of deep fjords, icy winds, and fragile beauty. He called it Greenland, not for what it was, but for what he hoped it could become. When Erik returned to Iceland, his words painted paradise, fertile soil, rich pastures, room for every dreamer cast out by fate. By 985 AD, nearly 25 ships set sail across the North Atlantic, carrying men, women, livestock, and the promise of a new beginning. Only 14 made it. The rest vanished beneath the waves, swallowed by storms or ice. Yet those who survived carved out the first European colony in the Western Hemisphere. Centuries before Columbus was even born. At Brattahlid, Erik built his hull, long and low, timber-framed, its hearth always burning. Around it grew farms and workshops, the beating heart of the eastern settlement. Stone churches rose beside turf houses. Oxen ploughed thin soil. Women wove wool from sheep brought across the sea. Every object, from a copper brooch to an iron knife, told a story of survival and stubborn faith. The Vikings were more than warriors. Here, they became settlers, priests, and dreamers. They hunted seal and walrus for ivory, traded hides with merchants from Norway, and sent ships loaded with furs, falcons, and narwhal tusks to Europe's cathedrals. The Church of Rome soon took notice. Priests arrived, and crosses stood beside carved dragons. Greenland was now not only a colony, it was Christendom's outpost at the edge of the earth. But the Vikings' hunger for discovery didn't stop there. To the west of Greenland, sailors spoke of an even greater land, forests richer than any in Scandinavia, rivers full of fish, and meadows untouched by human hands. Around 1000 AD, Leif Erikson, Erik's son, set out to find it. After weeks of cold seas and grey fog, they sighted it, a place of wild grapes and gentle weather. They called it Vinland, the land of wine. For the first time in history, Europeans had reached the shores of North America. They built shelters, traded briefly with the native peoples, and left behind the faintest traces, a handful of nails, a spindle whorl, a ring pin buried in Newfoundland soil. Then they were gone. Why they left remains uncertain. Conflict, distance, or the simple pull of survival back home. Vinland would fade into legend, a ghost whispered in Icelandic sagas. For a time, the Greenland colonies thrived, 2,000 souls clinging to life between ice and sea. But even as the fires burned in their halls and prayers echoed in their churches, the seeds of their disappearance were already being sown. Because the edge of the world is not conquered easily, and the sea, the same sea that carried them here, was waiting to take them back. For nearly 3 centuries, the Viking settlers of Greenland endured where no other Europeans dared live. They built farms from frozen soil, carved sanctuaries in valleys of ice, and raised families under a sun that never truly warmed them. By the 13th century, their world had settled into rhythm, short summers of labor and long winters of prayer. Sheep and cattle grazed on fragile meadows, hay was stored in sod barns, and ships still crossed the North Atlantic once or twice a year, linking these distant Norse souls with Norway and Iceland. In their minds, the colonies were not remote. They were the edge of God's kingdom, but nature has its own faith, one that does not forgive illusions. Around 1250 AD, the first signs appeared quietly: colder winds, longer winters, and sea ice creeping closer to Greenland's fjords. The hunters noticed first. Seals disappeared earlier each season. Farmers began losing livestock, and harvest shrank. The Norse called it a bad year. Historians now call it the beginning of the Little Ice Age. The climate turned against them, slowly, without mercy. The seas they once mastered began to choke with drifting ice. Navigation to Norway grew perilous. Ships vanished into fog, crushed by silent glaciers. Trade collapsed. The last recorded ship from Europe arrived in 1368. After that, only silence. Inside the settlements, hunger spread. Families slaughtered their cattle for meat they once saved for breeding. Children grew thin. Priests offered more prayers, but even faith could not thaw the ground. Archaeologists later found bones of dogs and seabirds among kitchen refuse, the diet of desperation. Still, they endured. The Norse spirit, born of storms, refused to yield. They built smaller houses, buried deeper stores, and even began to adopt Inuit hunting tools, harpoons, sealskin kayaks, bone-tipped arrows. Yet pride kept them apart. The Inuit Thule people, arriving from the north around the same time, were masters of the polar world. They lived where the Norse starved, but the settlers saw them as outsiders, even pagans. There are traces of contact, traded ivory, borrowed techniques, but little friendship. When survival demands humility, pride becomes fatal. In the ruins of the Western settlement, archaeologists found evidence of an abrupt end. Homes abandoned mid-meal, tools scattered, livestock pens empty. No bodies, no signs of battle, only absence. It was as if life itself had walked away. Climate records tell us the temperature fell by 2 degrees Celsius, enough to freeze pastures, starve animals, and trap ships in harbor. The sea, once the highway of the Vikings, had become a wall of ice. By 1400, even the eastern settlement, once home to thousands, was shrinking. The churches still held mass, but attendance dwindled. The last known written record from Greenland dates to 1408, describing a wedding in the church of Volsea. When later expeditions arrived, centuries afterward, they found that same church still standing, roofless, but intact. The stones still bore the marks of hammers long silenced. Some believe disease or famine killed them. Others think they migrated, perhaps sailing south to North America or east to Iceland, leaving no trace. But the most haunting theory is the simplest. They starved, quietly, with dignity, waiting for a ship that never came. The Greenland Norse were not defeated by war or invasion. They were defeated by isolation. Their courage, their faith, their ships, all meant nothing against the slow advance of ice. They had reached the end of the known world, and in time, the world reached back and claimed them. When the Norse first arrived in Greenland, they brought more than livestock and iron tools. They brought faith. In the early days, it was the faith of Odin and Thor, of sagas sung beside roaring hearths, and the old gods of sea and storm. But by the time their children's children walked the frozen meadows, another symbol had risen above the longhouses, the cross of Christ. For a time, the two faiths coexisted like ice and fire. The settlers built churches of stone beside pagan burial grounds. Priests from Norway sailed across the Atlantic, bringing candles, chalices, and the Latin tongue. The colonies became part of Christendom's frontier, the westernmost outpost of the medieval world. In 1126, the church established the bishopric of Gardar, a seat of authority in a land that barely clung to survival. A stone cathedral rose from the tundra, complete with imported stained glass and bronze bells cast in Europe. It was a declaration, even here, at the edge of the world, civilization and God would endure. But faith, like the sea, has its own tempest. As the winters grew harsher and trade from Europe dwindled, faith turned inward. The settlers prayed more, yet believed less in rescue. Priests preached that their suffering was divine punishment, a test of purity and obedience. The sagas tell of confessions growing darker, envy, despair, even accusations of witchcraft. In one fragment of the Icelandic annals, a merchant returning from Greenland around 1340 wrote of a people grown grim and godly, as if the ice itself ruled their hearts. Archaeologists later found churches with no graves, meaning burials had stopped. Either death had become too frequent, or too meaningless to mark. The once bustling settlements around Gardar and Brattahlid turned inward, their paths buried beneath snow and silence. Yet beyond their fjords, others had adapted. The Inuit Thule people, who had arrived from the north generations earlier. They hunted whales with harpoons, built homes of stone and bone, and shared the same sky the Norse once claimed as their own. Some exchanges happened, ivory for iron, furs for tools, but mutual distrust ran deep. The Norse saw pagans where they might have seen saviors. And so, where cooperation could have meant survival, pride demanded distance. Faith had given the Norse unity, but it also gave them blindness. They built churches even as the farms around them froze. They stored relics while their herds died in the fields. To abandon the cross would mean abandoning hope, and hope was all they had left. In the cold heart of the 14th century, an eerie transformation unfolded. The last surviving generations, trapped by the sea and betrayed by climate, turned increasingly to ritual and isolation. Their priests continued to record baptisms and weddings, long after trade, government, and connection to Europe had ceased. But the letters sent from the Bishop of Gardar to Norway were never answered. The ice had swallowed their words long before they reached home. By 1400, the colony had fractured not by sword, but by silence. Some families fled inland to hunt like the Inuit, leaving behind crosses carved in wood and bones buried beneath snow. Others clung to their faith until starvation took them in their sleep. When later explorers found the ruins of Gardar, they discovered an altar still standing, the chalice still in place, a candle holder rusted beside it. It was not desecrated. It was simply left behind. Faith had kept them alive longer than nature allowed. But in the end, it also blinded them to the one truth that every sailor knows: no belief, however pure, can calm a dying sea. The Viking world that had once conquered oceans was now trapped by its own devotion. And as the final bells of Gardar fell silent, the age of the Norse faded into legend, leaving behind only stone, silence, and the question that still haunts historians: did they die for their god, or for their pride? By the dawn of the 15th century, silence had settled over Greenland like snow on stone. The world that Erik the Red built, of laughter, prayers, and longhouse fires, had grown dim. The last echoes of hammer and bell had faded into the wind. There are no written accounts of the final days. Only fragments, bones, and whispers carved into the land itself. Archaeologists later pieced together clues like ghostly fingerprints. Abandoned farms where grass grows through broken walls. Churchyards with open graves, as if burials were begun but never finished. Tools left on workbenches, meals half prepared, doors still barred from inside. It was not conquest. It was not disease. It was simply disappearance, somewhere around 1450. The Greenland Norse vanished from history. What happened remains one of the Arctic's coldest mysteries. The most accepted theory is hunger, a slow, merciless famine. As the Little Ice Age deepened, the pastures froze solid. Livestock starved. Fish grew scarce as sea ice sealed the fjords. The seals the Inuit hunted easily were beyond Norse skill and tools. The settlers' European farming traditions became useless on an island that had turned to stone. Excavations at Erdjolfsens and Brattahlid tell the same grim story: thinner skeletons, signs of malnutrition, bones showing scurvy and infection. And yet, no mass graves, no last stand, just quiet, deliberate abandonment. It's possible that small groups tried to flee southward toward Vinland, hoping to find the legendary forests their ancestors once saw. Others may have gone north, joining or merging with Inuit communities. Indeed, Inuit oral histories speak of Kavlanate, pale outsiders who came from the sea, who spoke strangely, wore wool, and built stone huts that faced the wind. But their traces end abruptly, as if the land itself swallowed them. By the time Danish and Icelandic sailors returned centuries later, the settlements were gone. The church at Havelsea, once echoing with hymns, stood roofless but proud, its stone walls defying the centuries. Inside, archaeologists found nothing: no books, no tools, no bones, only stillness. The final recorded human act on Greenland's Norse soil remains the Havelsea wedding of 1408, written in an Icelandic archive. After that, nothing. Some historians imagine the last survivors gathered in that church one final winter, seeking warmth in prayers that the winds howled outside. They might have sung hymns to a god who no longer answered, waiting for ships that would never come. When the oil ran out, when the last cow fell, they likely burned furniture for heat, then wood from their church beams, until even that sacred fire turned to ash. The world moved on. Europe forgot them. The Black Death swept across the continent. Empires rose and fell. But in the frozen valleys of Greenland, the ghosts of a forgotten people lay beneath drifts of snow, untouched and unremembered. Centuries later, sailors rediscovered the ruins. They found crosses carved into stones, fragments of woolen cloth preserved in permafrost, and a child's wooden toy frozen in mud. Nothing of gold, nothing of glory, only reminders of a people who tried to bring civilization to the edge of the world and paid for it with their lives. Today, as archaeologists brush away centuries of frost, they find not the story of failure, but of endurance. For 400 years, these settlers defied nature, isolation, and time itself. Their faith may have blinded them, their pride may have doomed them, but their courage was unbreakable. The Norse colonies of Greenland remain a monument not just to human ambition, but to human fragility. They crossed oceans for dreams that outlived them. They built stone churches against the wind and believed those walls could hold back eternity. They were wrong. When the sea froze, it sealed not just their fate, but their memory. And so, beneath the endless white, they remain a people without a grave, a civilization without an ending, a story half told, carried only by the wind that still whispers across the fjords. They were here, centuries after the last Norse hearth in Greenland went cold. The wind still carries their memory. It moves through ruined stone walls and frozen fjords, whispering fragments of a vanished world. Echoes beneath the ice when Danish explorers rediscovered the lost settlements in the 18th century. They expected treasure, artifacts of Viking glory, relics of conquest and gold. Instead, they found silence, long houses collapsed under centuries of frost, churches roofless, their altars still facing east, bones of cattle, sheep, and seals scattered together, the archaeology of hunger. The earth had buried them gently, as if time itself wished to preserve their final dignity. Modern excavations reveal the details that history forgot. At Brattahlid, the home of Erik the Red, archaeologists unearthed hearthstones worn smooth by generations of hands, proof that families once laughed and ate together here. At Gardar, the seat of the Norse bishopric, the stones of the cathedral still stand, their corners sharp despite 6 centuries of storms. Fragments of stained glass, bronze bells, and carved ivory speak of a faith that refused to die. Even when its believers did. In laboratories far from the Arctic, scientists now analyze pollen, DNA, and bone isotopes reconstructing a world where faith and climate collided. They found that, as the cold deepened, the settlers changed their diet from livestock to seal meat, marking the last desperate adaptation of a proud people. Their bodies bear the story of endurance, written in calcium and frost, and yet, for all the data, one question remains unanswered. Why did they not leave? Why did the Norse stay when every sign pointed toward death? Some scholars say it was loyalty to their land, their faith, their ancestors. Others call it denial, a cultural blindness that could not imagine life beyond the order they had built. But perhaps it was something simpler, hope. The same hope that had carried them across oceans now held them fast in a frozen grave. Today, the ruins of the Greenland Norse lie beneath layers of permafrost and silence. Tourists who visit say the air feels heavy, as if it remembers. When the Arctic sun sets over the sea, the stones cast long shadows, and the fjord glows with the same light that once guided Viking ships home. No voices remain, no songs echo across the bay, only the rhythm of waves against forgotten shores. For historians, the Greenland colonies are not just a mystery, they are a mirror. They show how belief can both sustain and destroy, how courage can turn to pride, and pride to ruin, and how even the strongest civilizations, when cut off from the world, can fade without a single cry for help. In a warming world, their story speaks again. The same ice that once swallowed them now melts, revealing bones, wood, and forgotten tools, remnants of people who once thought the earth unchangeable. Their tragedy has become a warning carved in frost. No civilization is eternal. The Vikings who vanished beneath the ice left no monuments, no chronicles, no heroes, only stones, and the faint memory of hands that built them. And yet, that is enough, because in every ruin, there is a heartbeat, faint but real. Every fragment unearthed, every artifact preserved, is an act of remembrance. The Norse may have vanished, but their courage still endures in the cold silence they left behind. Their story ends not with death, but with discovery, the rediscovery of what it means to believe, to endure, and to disappear with dignity. And as the Arctic wind carries the echo of their world across the sea, it reminds us of a truth older than time, that nothing truly vanishes, not faith, not hope, not humanity, only sleeps, waiting for the day when someone will listen again. The ice remembers,